And can I just go back to Mr. Don, during the Senate inquiry into the Pell Air or aviation investigations, accident investigations, there was some consideration given. I understood that the ATSB was going to revisit the issue of whether the flight data recorder could in fact be retrieved. Was that something that was considered by the ATSB at Norfolk Island, in relation to the FDR at Norfolk Island?
In the light of the References Committee's report, Senator, the ATSB did reconsider the question of the flight data recorders, and based on an assessment of the safety benefits and the likely costs, decided not to proceed with the retrieval.
But the safety benefits and the likely costs, they were matters that were previously considered.
Senator, that's true, but we reconsidered it in the light of the committee's report and its recommendation.
So there weren't any other factors that were considered in the context of retrieving the flight data recorder?
We considered in the context of the parallel recommendation about reopening the investigation, Senator, so those two played against each other in the Commission's consideration of those two recommendations.
Mr. Dolan, in response to a question I placed on notice last estimates regarding the Pell Air investigation, I think it was question number 142, the ATSB responded that it had no power to withdraw its report or plans to conduct a further investigation, and that it stands by the finding of the report. That's the position of the ATSB?
That's correct, Senator.
During the committee inquiry into aviation accident report, I think it was in relation to a line of questioning from Senator Edwards, in fact, you stated that you were not proud of the report and that you certainly would not hold it as a benchmark.
That's correct, Senator.
So why is the ATSB standing by it, given your previous comments?
There's a difference between us not wishing to hold up the report as an exemplar of our best work and whether we consider, in terms of the Act, that the investigation is complete and therefore the report as published should stand.
But under the Act, you do have the power to reopen an investigation, don't you?
Yes, Senator, and we will when new and significant information comes to light that may be relevant to the previous investigation.
So you don't think anything that was uncovered in the context of the Senate inquiry was in any way new or significant?
I and my fellow commissioners very carefully went through the contents of the committee's report and tested it against the information we had available to us in the course of our investigation, and there was nothing in our view that constituted new and significant information that would lead to a need to reopen the investigation.
How did it go from a critical whatever incident to a don't worry about it?
Minor.
That's a matter we did rehearse with the References Committee, Senator, and in short, our initial assessment of the issue of guidance as to dealing with a situation where weather deteriorates from what was planned, we over-assessed it as critical at an early stage, and by applying our methodologies concluded by the end of the process that it constituted a minor safety issue.
Can I commend you that you look really well? You look less stressed than you used to for some reason.
That's the back of the beard, probably, Senator.
But that particular incident of which I just spoke, no thinking person would believe that bureaucratic answer. I mean, you can't go from a critical incident to a minor or whatever it was without something happening on the journey. But anyhow, we won't go back there. But to any sensible person, that sounds like a bloody either a cover-up or balls up.
Through you, Chair, Mr. Dolan, given that there was no new or, in your view, in the view of the ATSB, no new or significant information arising out of the Senate inquiry.
New and significant.
New and significant. So it has to be both new and significant. I understand the threshold that the ATSB has set in respect to that. Is this something that was considered by the board of the ATSB?
By the three commissioners who legally constitute the ATSB, yes, Senator.
Right. And in considering that, how much time was given to consider that at its meeting?
We set aside the bulk of our one-day meeting as a formal meeting as a commission to working through the range of recommendations of the committee's report, both to inform our input to a government response and to look at what steps we needed to take to learn from the Pell Air investigation and the investigations of the committee.
Can you indicate whether you provided advice to the government as to why you thought there was nothing new and significant arising out of the Senate inquiry report, with a view to reopening the investigation or reconsidering your findings?
The advice that we provided through the department to the government is decision-making advice for the government. I'm not sure I'm in a position to comment on that, Senator.
But did you actually, well, I'm not asking you for the content of that advice, but I'm asking you whether you in fact provided advice as to whether you ought to reopen in any way the ATSB's report into the Pell Air incident. Sorry?
Senator, I don't think you can discuss the content or the
I'm not asking for the content.
The inference to be drawn as to what the advice was about. If there was advice, well, there was advice.
But I'm just trying to establish whether there was advice on this particular issue. I'm not asking for an inference as to whether there was advice one way or the other, as to whether there was any.
Well, I think departments provide advice on all manner of issues. I think you can assume that they did.
I'm just trying to establish that from Mr. Dolan, whether he actually.
Excuse me.
That's right. No.
Over to you.
Senator, as I indicated, the Commission considered for its own purposes the question of whether to reopen the investigation, and our consideration was also informed the nature of our advice to government about what we would see as an appropriate response to the report.
Right. Now that the TSB, the Canadian TSB, is looking at the ATSB and in particular, given the terms of reference, the Pell Air incident and the way the ATSB conducted itself, is the ATSB still open to a reopening, either a withdrawal of its report or conducting a further investigation or reconsidering its report as a result of any findings by the Canadian TSB?
There's 2 points, Senator. As I tried to make clear in the response to the question on notice, legally speaking, we cannot withdraw a report. We can amend a report, but we're not in a position to withdraw it.
But would you consider amending the report? You haven't considered to do so on the basis of the Senate inquiry and its report, but is that something that will be considered in the context of the Canadian TSB report?
The threshold test remains, Senator. If there is new and significant information that is relevant to the investigation, then we have not just a power but a responsibility to reopen the investigation. If anything comes out of the Canadian review that points in that direction, then we'll have to review it and make an appropriate decision.
Do you think it's appropriate, though, it's a case of Caesar judging Caesar, because you need to determine whether it is new, which usually can be fairly objectively determined, but whether there is significant material, both new and significant? Do you agree that that is something that can be the subject of a judgment call by the very essence of determining whether something is significant or minor?
I would totally agree, Senator, that this is a matter of judgment. This is a matter of judgment that by the Transport Safety Investigation Act is given to the ATSB as constituted by its 3 commissioners.
But do you consider, given the matters that arose out of the Senate inquiry, the evidence that was given, and that whole process and issues with respect to the MOU between CASA and the ATSB, for instance, and other matters about that downgrading of the nature of the report from critical to a, I think, minor safety incident, do you think in those circumstances it would be preferable for public confidence in the ATSB for there to have been an impartial arbiter or impartial advice sought from an expert to give advice to the ATSB in respect to that, rather than the commissioners basically just making a judgment call as to whether it ought to be amended or reopened based on your previous judgments? You can understand why there might be some concern about that.
I understand the concern, Senator, and all I can reiterate is that the responsibility for making those judgments by law rests with the ATSB, and we will continue to exercise our responsibilities under the Act.
Sure, I understand your responsibilities under the Act, but do you consider it preferable in terms of the public confidence in the ATSB, given the highly critical nature of the Senate Committee's report with respect to the Pelair incident, and criticisms from others who gave evidence to the inquiry, that it would not be unreasonable for the ATSB to have sought an independent person, an independent entity, to provide advice before you considered whether there was something new and significant in the context of reopening any investigation to the Pelair incident?
The three commissioners, Senator, determined that it was their responsibility to make that assessment, and we didn't see any need or possibility to defer that decision to someone else. What we did do, quite deliberately, was ask a counterpart organisation, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, to benchmark our investigation methodology against their investigation methodology, and to review 3 of our investigations in the light of that, essentially against what the TSB would have done as against what we did, and to give us an independent report on the results. It's entirely possible that as a result of that there will be new and significant information. If there is, then the Commission will reopen the investigation.
But it goes beyond methodology, doesn't it? Because methodology, looking at the methodology of the ATSB is a little different from the reality of how the ATSB may or may not have implemented that methodology.
It's the methodology and how it was applied, Senator.
Okay, so it does go beyond methodology.
Very much beyond methodology into how it was applied.
I think, Senator, going back to my earlier answer about the integrity of the process, the terms of reference that have been given to the Transportation Safety Board of Canada and the way in which they're looking at that will, and the advice to government from the ATSB on that process will underpin the government's response when that is tabled in terms of the very questions you're asking, I think.
But Mr Murdoch, you understand the disquiet in the aviation community that the ATSB was effectively Caesar judging Caesar. The commissioners had to make a determination as to whether they did a good job or not in terms of their previous report that was the subject of scathing criticism by a Senate inquiry.
And certainly I understand.
But you acknowledge that?
I understand, and I've certainly closely reviewed the Senate inquiry report, but I think Mr Dolan has set out for you in seeking the advice from the Canadian authorities is the way in which the ATSB has sought to deal with a number of the issues raised in the Senate committee report.